Does the soul of a band reside in the ink of the lyricist's pen? Or does it live in the trembling sustain of a string bent a tone and a half up, screaming a melody that words fail to capture? This is the fundamental, polarizing question that haunts the legacy of Pink Floyd. It forces us to choose sides in a civil war that has raged for decades. To understand the tectonic collision between Roger Waters and David Gilmour is to understand the difference between architecture and atmosphere, between the rigid intellect of a concept and the visceral, unquantifiable release of a performance. You have come here looking for a simple binary, a story of a tyrant and a martyr. But if you have ever spent a decade hauling heavy tube amplifiers into damp vans, arguing over a bridge progression in a smoke-filled studio, or watching a lead singer's ego consume the oxygen in a room, you know that music is never that clean. The demise of Pink Floyd was not a crime scene with a single perpetrator. It was a slow-motion car crash of two massive, incompatible egos. To label David Gilmour merely a victim is to vastly underestimate the steel backbone of a man who redefined the electric guitar not through speed, but through the sheer, arrogant weight of his silence. We need to strip away the romanticism that casual fans plaster over the history of rock and roll, and look at the mechanics of the sound and the cold, hard business of survival. In the high-stakes world of stadium rock, being a nice guy is a luxury few can afford, and David Gilmour, for all his melodic grace, is a survivor who played the long game with the precision of a sniper. To truly grasp the magnitude of Gilmour's coup, we must first dissect the sonic landscape of the 1970s, a period where the band transitioned from the psychedelic, improvisational collective of the Syd Barrett era into a highly structured, album-oriented juggernaut. When Gilmour joined, he was not merely a replacement for a damaged genius. He was the stabilizing agent, the musical glue that allowed the band's experimental urges to adhere to a listenable structure. By the time we reach Animals in 1977, however, the dynamic had shifted catastrophically. Roger Waters was constructing the cages. David Gilmour was tasked with decorating them. From a hardened musician's perspective, this is where the friction sparks into an inferno. You have a bassist and lyricist becoming obsessed with the libretto, the message, the bite of the word, often at the expense of the musical groove. Waters is a man of rhythm and intellect, a limited instrumentalist who compensated with grand vision and a terrifying drive. Gilmour is a creature of melody and touch, a blues-based player deeply rooted in the pentatonic scale, but with a sophisticated, almost orchestral ear for texture and delay-soaked ambiance. The friction arose because a guitar player of Gilmour's caliber needs space. He does not play notes, he plays the spaces between them. His signature tone, that colossal, compressed, sustained cry, achieved through the alchemy of a Fender Stratocaster, a silicon fuzz, specifically the legendary Ram's Head Big Muff, and the Benson EchoRec or later MXR digital delays, requires room to breathe. Waters began filling every frequency range with dense lyrics, sound effects, and theatrical shouting. By the recording of The Wall, Gilmour was no longer a collaborator in the traditional sense. He was a musical director trying to impose musicality onto a project that was becoming increasingly theatrical, neurotic, and dry. Here lies the crux of the victim narrative. Yes, Waters was domineering. He bullied Richard Wright out of the band, an act of musical fratricide that changed the harmonic complexion of the group forever. Without Wright's jazz-inflected chord voicings, those minor ninths and suspended chords that gave tracks like Us and Them their ethereal float, Gilmour lost his harmonic foil. He was left alone to battle Waters' brutalist structures. However, to say Gilmour was purely a victim ignores the reality of the studio environment. Gilmour is a perfectionist. He is stubborn. He knows exactly how he wants to sound. In the sessions for The Wall, despite the tension, he carved out Comfortably Numb. And let's be clear about the provenance of this track. The chord progression and the melody were not birthed in a collaborative jam. They were from a demo Gilmour had recorded for his first solo album. He brought the music to the table. That solo is not the work of a beaten man. It is an act of defiance. The first solo is major key, lyrical, almost happy, floating over the D major chorus progression. The second solo, the darker outro, descends into the B minor verse structure. It is violent. It is aggressive. It is Gilmour asserting his dominance over the track. He fought for that musical space. A victim does not play with that kind of authority. The narrative shifts dramatically with the final cut. This album is often cited by historians as the moment Gilmour was crushed. The guitar work is sparse. The album is essentially a Roger Waters solo project with Pink Floyd as the backing band. Gilmour has been vocal about his dislike for the material, famously critiquing the inclusion of songs that weren't good enough for the wall. This is where the villain aspect begins to germinate, not in malice, but in cold, hard business pragmatism. Gilmour looked at the direction Waters was taking, wordy, political, musically dry, and realized it was unsustainable for a stadium rock act. It was art, certainly, but it wasn't the Pink Floyd sound that filled arenas. When Waters declared the band a spent force and attempted to dissolve the partnership, he made a classic strategic error. He assumed the band was him. He underestimated Gilmour's resolve. This is where we must drop the gentle uncle persona often attributed to Gilmour. When the lawsuit hit, Gilmour didn't fold. He didn't walk away to play blues in a pub. He fought. He fought for the name, the pig, the circle screen, and the legacy. Was this an artistic crusade or a business maneuver? It was both. Gilmour understood that the brand Pink Floyd was a license to print money, but more importantly, he believed that the sound of the band, the texture, the grandeur, the melodic sweep, was his domain. He was reclaiming the sonic identity that Waters had suffocated. Let's look at a momentary lapse of reason with the critical ear of a producer. Is it a true band album? Hardly. It is a David Gilmour solo album dressed in Floyd's clothing, fortified by an army of session musicians. With Nick Mason out of practice and Rick Wright initially hired as a salaried musician due to legal complexities, Gilmour leaned on heavy hitters like Tony Levin on bass and Carmine Appice, and Jim Keltner on drums to secure the rhythm section. Gilmour brought in outside songwriters to patch the lyrical holes left by Waters. He polished the production to a shiny 1980s sheen that lacks the organic grit of the 70s. Critics, and Waters, called it a forgery. But listen to the guitar work on Sorrow. Listen to the intro, recorded inside an arena to capture the natural reverb. That sound is massive. It is the sound of a guitarist finally unleashed from the constraints of a lyrical dictator. Gilmour wasn't playing the victim here. He was playing the CEO of a multinational corporation. He was ruthless in re-establishing the brand. He proved that to the average listener, the voice and the guitar were Pink Floyd. The lyrics were secondary to the atmosphere. This realization drove Waters mad, but it was the reality of the market. Gilmour's villainy, if you want to call it that, lies in his willingness to continue the machine without its primary architect. He sanitized the band. He removed the bite, the political edge, the ugliness that made Animals and the Wall so compelling, and replaced it with a smooth, palatable, high-fidelity experience. The Division Bell is a beautiful record, full of glorious guitar tones and rich textures, but it is safe. It is music for hi-fi systems, not for revolutions. By doing this, Gilmour won the war for the public's affection. He gave the people what they wanted. The soaring solos, the laser shows, the nostalgia. He turned Pink Floyd into a heritage act while it was still active. But let us return to the instrument, because the guitar never lies. Gilmour's technique is the ultimate rebuttal to the idea that he is just a feeling player with no technical depth. His bending accuracy is pitch perfect. Most guitarists, even professionals, drift in their intonation when bending a whole step or 1.5 steps, a minor third bend. Gilmour hits the target note with the precision of a fretless instrument. He uses the whammy bar not for dive bombs, but for a shimmering vibrato that adds a vocal quality to chords. This requires immense physical control and strength. When he stands on stage, playing the intro to Shine On You Crazy Diamond, he is not hiding behind a wall of production. He is the production. That four-note arpeggio phrase, B, B, F, G, E, is simple in theory, but devastating in execution because of his timing. He waits. He lets the silence hang. This is the confidence of a master. In the aftermath of the split, Gilmour displayed a passive-aggressive mastery that borders on the Machiavellian. He rarely spoke ill of Waters in the screaming manner Waters spoke of him. Instead, he let the tour numbers do the talking. He played the songs Waters wrote, Money, Wish You Were Here, Comfortably Numb, and the crowds cheered for Gilmour. He appropriated the genius of his rival and made it his own vehicle. Is that theft, or is it the right of the interpreter? In classical music, we do not begrudge the conductor for interpreting Beethoven. Gilmour argued that the music belonged to the band, not the man who wrote the words. To truly understand why Gilmour won the hearts of the public while Waters won the critical analysis of the lyrics, we have to go deeper into the gear and the technique. This is not gear fetishism. It is the study of a painter's palette. When Gilmour steps onto the stage, he is wielding a sonic weapon that was carefully cultivated to occupy a specific frequency range that cuts through a mix without being piercing. This is where the silent victim narrative falls apart completely. A man who designs a sound this dominant is not passive. Consider the Black Strat. This is not just a piece of wood. It is a Frankenstein's monster of modifications, constantly tweaked to serve Gilmour's evolving needs. The shortening of the tremolo arm to allow him to hold it in his palm while picking is an ergonomic adaptation that defines his phrasing. It allows him to add that subtle shimmer to chords and single notes effortlessly, bridging the gap between the mechanical nature of the guitar and the fluidity of the human voice. This is the behavior of an obsessed craftsman. During the recording of The Wall, while Waters was obsessing over the narrative arc of Pink, Gilmour was obsessing over the compression ratio on his compressor pedal. He knew that for the solos to carry the emotional weight of the story, they needed to have infinite sustain. He was doing the heavy lifting of the emotional narrative through physics and electronics. When the split happened, Waters had the concepts, but he didn't have the timbre. Waters' solo albums, musically, often sounded dry and brittle compared to the lush soundscapes of Floyd. Gilmour, however, retained the keys to the kingdom of sound. He kept the relationship with the engineers, the producers, and the stage designers. He understood that Pink Floyd was an immersive experience. Let's be realistic about the villain aspect regarding the session musicians. In the late 80s, during the production of A Momentary Lapse of Reason, Gilmour was under immense pressure. CBS Records was watching. The promoters were watching. If the album flopped, Waters would have been vindicated. Gilmour couldn't afford a mistake, so he hired the best guns in the world. He brought in players who could execute his vision with zero friction. Was this a betrayal of the band ethos? Absolutely. Pink Floyd ceased to be a band and became a David Gilmour project. But from a professional standpoint, it was the only move he could make. A democracy would have produced a mediocre album that would have been crushed by Waters' criticism. Gilmour's ruthlessness in the studio saved the franchise. The High Hopes solo from the Division Bell serves as the perfect epilogue to this conflict. Played not on a standard guitar, but on a console steel, specifically a Fender Stringmaster, it is melancholic, yearning, and technically distinct from his standard blues phrasing. It slides and weeps. It is the sound of a man looking back at the carnage of the past decades, the madness of Sid, the tyranny of Roger, the struggle for identity, and finding a resolution in the melody. It is the final argument in the trial of Gilmour versus Waters. The lyrics speak of, "The grass was greener," a nod to the past, but the slide solo points upward, soaring into the reverb. It is the ultimate statement of musical superiority. Waters could write about the pain, but Gilmour could make you feel it in your chest cavity without uttering a syllable. Furthermore, we must address the vocal contrast. Waters has a limited vocal range. He often speaks, sings, shouts, or whispers. It is theatrical, but it is abrasive. Gilmour's voice is soft, breathy, capable of harmonizing with itself. It is the honey that makes the medicine go down. When they sang together like on Comfortably Numb, verses by Waters, choruses by Gilmour, it was magic. The doctor, Waters, was clinical and cold. The patient, Gilmour, was floating and detached. When they split, Waters lost the melody. Gilmour lost the bite. But the general public, the people who buy tickets to stadiums, they prefer the melody. They want to sing along to Wish You Were Here. They don't necessarily want to be screamed at about the evils of capitalism for 2 hours straight. Gilmour understood his audience better than Waters did. There is a cold reality to the music business that fans hate to admit. Familiarity sells. Gilmour's decision to tour under the Pink Floyd name, playing the hits, using the circular screen, was a calculated commercial decision. He was giving the customers the product they recognized. Waters, in his artistic integrity, wanted to challenge the audience with new, difficult material. Gilmour wanted to comfort them. In the court of artistic purity, perhaps Waters has the moral high ground. But in the court of rock and roll survival, Gilmour is the king. He understood that the band was bigger than any one member, even the one who wrote the lyrics. If we strip away the biography and look at the music theory behind Gilmour's post-Waters era, we see a deliberate shift in harmonic language that reflects his leadership. Waters' writing was often rooted in simple folk chord progressions or plodding, hypnotic bass riffs. It was functional harmony designed to support the lyrics. Gilmour, left to his own devices, returned the band to a more atmospheric, almost impressionistic harmonic structure. Look at Marooned from the Division Bell. It's an instrumental. There are no words to hide behind. It is pure texture. He uses a Digitech whammy pedal to shift the pitch of his guitar by a full octave, creating a sound that mimics a seagull or a lonely cry in a vast canyon. The chords underneath are suspended, unresolved. This is Gilmour saying, "I do not need to tell you what to think. I will make you feel the isolation." This approach requires a profound confidence in one's own musicality. A lesser musician would have tried to copy Waters' style to appease the critics. Gilmour went the opposite direction. He doubled down on the ambient side of Floyd. He embraced the new age elements that were bubbling up in the late 80s and early 90s, but anchored them with his blues roots. This combination, futuristic texture with ancient blues phrasing, is the hallmark of the Gilmour era. We must also consider the role of silence in his phrasing. In a world of shredders, guitarists like Eddie Van Halen and Yngwie Malmsteen who were dominating the 80s with 30-second notes and sweep picking, Gilmour stood still. He played whole notes. He played half notes. He let a note ring for 2 bars. This was a radical act. It was a rejection of the athletics of guitar playing. By doing so, he maintained the dignity of Pink Floyd. If he had tried to modernize the band by playing faster, it would have been a disaster. He kept the music slow, majestic, and heavy. This gravitational pull is what kept the stadiums full. People went to a Pink Floyd show to experience a kind of secular religious service, and Gilmour was the high priest, conducting the liturgy of slow tempos and massive reverbs. There is a misconception that Gilmour is a pentatonic wanker, a derogatory term used by jazz snobs to describe blues rock players. This is a gross oversimplification. While his bass is the minor pentatonic, his choice of target notes is sophisticated. He frequently targets the chord tones, the third and the fifth, rather than just running the scale. He uses chromatic passing tones to create tension before resolving to the root. In time, the solo is a masterclass in phrasing across the bar line. He doesn't just play in 4/4. He plays phrases that stretch and contract, landing on the beat with a heavy vibrato that feels like a massive weight dropping. And let's talk about that vibrato. It is his fingerprint. You can identify David Gilmour from a single note. Why? Because most guitarists have a nervous vibrato, a fast, insect-like flutter. Gilmour's vibrato is slow, wide, and rhythmic. It breathes. It mimics the vibrato of an opera singer. This human element is what makes his guitar playing so emotional. It is a voice. When Waters left, he took the lyrics, but Gilmour kept the voice of the band. The victim narrative also ignores the fact that Gilmour was a multi-instrumentalist, who often played bass on the records because Waters couldn't get the feel right, or was busy with other tasks. On one of these days, that driving, delay-soaked bass line uses 2 bass guitars, one played by Roger, but the other played by Gilmour to add that percussive, trebly bite. On tracks like Pigs, 3 different ones, and Sheep, Gilmour handled the fretless bass duties. He was the musical engine room, Waters was the captain shouting orders, but Gilmour was the one shoveling the coal and steering the rudder. When the captain jumped ship, the engineer just walked up to the bridge and took over. He knew how the ship worked better than the captain did. In the final analysis, the story of David Gilmour is a story of quiet power. He did not engage in the media wars with the same vitriol as Waters. He did not write concept albums attacking his former bandmate. He just played. He polished his Stratocaster, dialed in his delay, and played the notes that the world wanted to hear. He proved that in the chaotic, ego-driven world of rock and roll, the one who controls the melody controls the legacy. He is the survivor who refused to apologize for his success. He is the guardian of the sound. And as long as there are people who want to close their eyes and float downstream on a river of reverb, David Gilmour will never be the villain. He will be the pilot. We need to dive deeper into the alchemy of his sustain. It's a word thrown around by amateurs in guitar shops, but in Gilmour's hands, sustain is not an effect. It is a structural element of the composition. Listen to the opening note of the first solo in Comfortably Numb. He hits the high D and it hangs there. It doesn't decay immediately like a standard plucked string. It blooms. This bloom is the result of high volume, acoustic coupling between the high-watt amplifier and the guitar, and the compression from the big muff. He is manipulating the feedback loop. He is riding the edge of chaos. If he turns slightly, it might squeal uncontrollably. If he stops focusing, the note dies. This physical relationship with the amplifier is something that cannot be programmed. It is the antithesis of the modern, quantized, grid-based music production. It is dangerous. Waters, for all his genius, was a control freak. He wanted everything precise. Gilmour introduced the element of danger, the possibility that the feedback might take over. That tension is what makes the records feel alive. When Waters left, Gilmour had to manufacture that danger artificially, which is why the later albums feel safer. But in the live setting, standing in front of 20,000 people, Gilmour could still summon that beast. Let's talk about the blues, not the American Delta blues, but the specific white British interpretation of the blues that Gilmour perfected. It is a blues stripped of its rough edges and polished into a diamond. It is the blues of the middle class, melancholic, reflective, existential, rather than desperate and impoverished. Critics mock this. They call it yacht rock blues. But there is a universality to it. When Gilmour plays a slow blues in B minor, he is tapping into a very specific English melancholy, a gray sky resignation that resonates globally. Waters was angry. His lyrics were about war, madness, and fascism. Gilmour's guitar was about sadness. Anger burns out, sadness lingers. That is why Gilmour's contribution has aged better. We are not always angry about politics, but we are often sad about the passage of time. Time, us and them, high hopes. These are songs about the erosion of life. Gilmour's guitar tone is the sound of that erosion. It is weeping. Waters could describe the weeping, but Gilmour was the tears. Consider the recording of Dark Side of the Moon. While Waters was writing the lyrics on cue cards, Gilmour was experimenting with the EMS Synthi AKS synthesizer on the Run. He was embracing technology. He was always forward-thinking regarding the tools of the trade. The villain narrative suggests he was a traditionalist holding back Waters' avant-garde vision. In reality, Gilmour was often the one pushing for better fidelity, better synthesizers, better recording techniques. He wanted the album to sound like it came from the future. Waters wanted the album to say something about the present. This divergence is key. Gilmour's obsession with sonic perfection meant that Dark Side of the Moon is still used to test high-end speakers 50 years later. If it had been left solely to Waters, it might have been a punkier, rougher record, but it wouldn't be the audiophile benchmark it is today. Gilmour ensured the band's longevity through sonic excellence. He made them future-proof. The 1980s were a cruel time for 70s rock giants. Led Zeppelin disbanded. The Who were struggling, yes, struggled to reinvent themselves. Pink Floyd, under Gilmour's stewardship, managed to become even bigger commercially. How? By becoming a spectacle. Gilmour realized that without the magnetic and problematic personality of Waters, The show had to be the star. He invested millions in lasers, flying pigs, and the massive stage setups for the momentary lapse and division bell tours. He turned Pink Floyd into an event. This was a corporate move. Yes, it was soulless according to the critics. But it allowed the music to reach a new generation. Kids who didn't care about the politics of the 1970s came for the light show and stayed for the guitar solos. Gilmour democratized the band. He removed the barrier of entry that was Waters' dense intellectualism. Is that selling out, or is it adaptation? In the Darwinian struggle of the music industry, adaptation is the only virtue that matters. Let's analyze the rhythm playing of David Gilmour, an aspect criminally overlooked. Everyone talks about the solos, but listen to the funk rhythm on Any Color You Like. Listen to the aggressive strumming on Sheep. Gilmour has a right hand of iron. He locks in with the drummer in a way that Waters rarely did. Nick Mason has admitted that he found it easier to play with Gilmour because Gilmour had a better internal clock. A band is built on the rhythm section. If the bass player, Waters, is more focused on the lyrics than the groove, the band suffers. Gilmour often stepped in to record the bass lines to save the groove. This is the behavior of a musician who puts the song above the ego. He didn't care who got the credit for the bass line. He just wanted it to feel right. That is the definition of a servant to the music. And yet, he is cast as the villain for wanting to keep the band going? It is absurd. He was the one keeping the musical integrity intact, while Waters was busy building walls, both literal and metaphorical. The communication breakdown between them wasn't just personal, it was linguistic. Waters spoke in words, Gilmour spoke in chords. When Waters brought in the wall demos, they were rough, barely listenable cassettes. Gilmour had to sift through the mud to find the gold. He had to act as an editor. Writers hate editors. They feel censored. But without an editor, the wall would have been a triple album of unlistenable ranting. Gilmour filtered Waters' excess. He trimmed the fat. He added the sugar. Run Like Hell was music Gilmour wrote. Waters added the lyrics. It is one of the few up-tempo, driving tracks on the album. It works because it is a collaboration. When that collaboration ended, Waters' solo albums became bloated with text. They lacked the musical hooks. Gilmour's solo albums lacked the lyrical depth, but they sounded fantastic. It proved that they were two halves of a whole. But if you had to choose one to listen to on a road trip, you chose the one that sounded good. You chose Gilmour. We must also confront the ghost of Syd Barrett that hangs over Gilmour. Gilmour was the one who had to watch his friend deteriorate. He was the one who was brought in to mimic Syd's parts when Syd became too unpredictable to play. That guilt, that shadow, forged Gilmour's protective nature over the band. He saw what happened when the music stopped and the madness took over. He became the designated driver of Pink Floyd. He ensured the band stayed professional. Waters often romanticized the madness. Gilmour had to clean up the vomit. This practical grounding influence is not villainous. It is the reason the band survived the 70s. While other bands were overdosing or imploding, Pink Floyd was efficient. They showed up on time. They delivered. That was Gilmour's work ethic. He treated being a rock star as a job, a craft, not a lifestyle of debauchery. In the end, the dispute comes down to ownership. Not of the copyright, but of the feeling. Who owns the feeling of "Shine on You Crazy Diamond"? Is it the man who wrote the words about Syd? Or the man whose guitar cries the 4 notes that summon Syd's ghost? The audience has voted. When Gilmour plays those notes, the room weeps. The connection is visceral. It bypasses the brain and hits the nervous system. Waters engages the brain. Gilmour engages the gut. In the hierarchy of rock and roll, the gut always wins. We listen to music to feel, not to study. Gilmour understood this primal truth. He knew that a Stratocaster plugged into a 100-watt high-watt stack could communicate more human emotion than a 1,000-page manifesto. He bet his career on that truth, and he won. He is the quiet victor of the loudest war in rock history. He is the man who proved that silence, sustain, and tone are the ultimate weapons. He is not a victim. He is the master of the game. The psychological toll of the post-Waters era on Gilmour should not be underestimated. nor should his response to it be viewed as anything other than a display of immense fortitude. Imagine the scenario. It is 1987. You are David Gilmour. The press is calling you a fraud. Your former bandmate is threatening to sue promoters who book your band. You are mortgaging your houses to finance a tour that might bankrupt you if it fails. The victim would have crumbled. The villain would have fought dirty. Gilmour did neither. He focused on the work. He went into the houseboat studio, the Astoria, and he worked on the guitar tones until they were perfect. He focused on the craft. This is the lesson for any musician reading this. When the world is against you, shut up and play. Don't tweet, don't interview, don't litigate in the press. Just play so well that they cannot ignore you. Gilmour's vindication didn't come from a judge. It came from the roar of the crowd at the Omni Coliseum in Atlanta when the tour kicked off. It came from the sheer scale of the success. There is a moment in the Pulse concert film during the solo of Comfortably Numb where the giant mirror ball descends and opens up. The light hits Gilmour. He is older, balding, wearing a simple t-shirt. He looks like a dad, but the sound coming out of that guitar is the sound of God. It is absolute authority. In that moment, nobody cares about Roger Waters. Nobody cares about the lawsuits. The music has transcended the politics. Gilmour achieved transcendence through persistence. He refused to let the toxicity of the breakup poison the music. He protected the art from the artist. That is his legacy. He separated the creation from the creator's squabbles. He gave the music back to the fans. So when you see the clickbait articles calling him a tyrant for continuing the band, or a victim for enduring Waters' abuse, ignore them. Look at the hands. Look at the vibrato. Look at the signal chain. That is where the truth is. The truth is that David Gilmour is one of the few musicians in history who understood that the electric guitar is a conductor for the human soul, and he protected that conduit with his life. He is the guardian at the gate, the keeper of the flame, the man who ensured that the great gig in the sky would never go silent. He is the professional. He is the virtuoso of the slow burn. And in the history of rock, the slow burn always outlasts the explosion.